Hello everyone, welcome to Lean Leadership Part 2 of a 3-part webinar series. And before I begin, my name is Karen Martin, by the way, and before I begin I'd love to do a quick sound check to make sure you can hear me loud and clear. Could you please do me a favor if you can hear me and raise your little hand? It's a yellow hand on your control panel. All right, excellent, yay, yay. And now you've had practice in raising your hand, so if you want to ask a question verbally during the webinar, you know what to do. If you want to ask questions, you can also write them in the question panel on your control panel, and I'll probably take most of them at the very end of the webinar. So thank you all for joining. And you know what's so exciting about this is that here we are more than a decade into Lean really getting its foothold, a very strong foothold in the U.S. And there are people from 38 countries on this webinar today. And that just goes to show me and hopefully all of you that we are indeed moving beyond the Lean tools orientation and moving more and more into understanding the cultural and leadership implications that without which Lean the tools fail. And so you really have to have those fundamentals in place, strong leadership, strong culture, and it kind of all works together. So that's very good news. Now, one more thing before we get started. What I'd love to do is an exercise. I've never done an exercise during a webinar, but we're going to try it. So if you want to get your smartphone or a stopwatch available, we'll need it about, I don't know, maybe 10-15 minutes from now, and a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen. We're going to do a little activity to prove a point. So go ahead and get that ready. Also, for those of you who are used to downloading materials from our website, we've changed that now that GoToWebinar allows us to load them right into your control panel. So you should see a PDF that you can download straight from your control panel for the materials for today. All right, so let's get going. Let's do, first of all, a recap of Part 1. For those of you who haven't seen Part 1, it is available on our website. It's just ksmartin.com/webinars, and you can also find them on Vimeo, SlideShare, and YouTube. So Part 1 is up all those places. Now, what I referred to in Part 1, and we'll refer to here and also in Part 3, is the triangle of Lean management. There are many, many components to Lean management. Many people new to Lean think it's just a process design technique, and that couldn't be further from the truth. There are really 3 different buckets of components of Lean. We have management practices, or the types of behaviors that you exhibit on an ongoing basis. We have the process design piece of it, the actual mechanics of making a process more waste-free and leveling incoming loads and loads within a production line or even an office or service type of series of processes. And then underlying all of that are the core values or principles or philosophies that make Lean so powerful. And in the first webinar, we talked about some of the core philosophies and behaviors in terms of humility, respect, and curiosity, and why those are key to success with Lean management. Also, a little bit about the fundamentals of visual management and work standardization. And then we also talked about how you handle key performance indicators and how you can help manage the operation more effectively using that. So remember that for those of you who are used to the webinars, these 3 webinars are going to be focused far more on what senior leaders need to do. So if you're not a senior leader, then listen to the webinar with an ear for how can I coach my senior leaders? How can I coach up and help them understand what they need to be doing to support me and what I'm trying to do in my improvement role or in my manager role with an improvement passion. So that's what the whole focus is. Now in today's webinar, what we're going to talk about is primarily strategy deployment, which is also known as Hoshin Kanri or Hoshin planning, and how Pdsa problem solving interplays with strategy deployment. And again, this is something where you want your senior-most leaders to be deeply engaged with. However, if you can't get them deeply engaged yet, then you can apply these things wherever you sit in the organization and wherever you have a sphere of influence that you can help people understand how they need to behave and think a little differently than perhaps they have. Then I want to also mention next Thursday, October 27th will be the next and final part of the 3-part webinar series. So it's again Thursday, October 27th. You can either click on our webinars page on the website and register there, or you can just use this whole big URL and register there if you'd like. And it's going to focus on value stream management and a little bit about value stream mapping. It's going to be primarily about value stream management and getting leadership, senior leadership, heavily involved in value stream mapping. I'm not going to go as much into the mechanics of mapping because there are already many, many webinars available on our site and on those other social media outlets for value stream mapping. So let's get into it. Hoshin planning, otherwise known as strategy deployment. Why is it so important? So first I'll say that when an organization decides to take a transformation path and they're using either Lean, Six Sigma, they're attempting to combine the two, they're using some other methodology, even traditional TQM, total quality management. There are many places where organizations choose to start. Some organizations start at the front lines and it's kind of a grassroots grow. Some rare, but some organizations have a CEO or even a board member at the top that has been exposed to Lean and seen its power, and so he or she is driving it down through the organization, and some organizations start kind of in the middle ranks. So regardless of where you start, eventually you have to get to strategy deployment if you want to be successful. Strategy deployment is something that, without it, organizations will have, kind of spotty success, but they're not going to be able to get the big overarching success and significant performance improvement that the company really wants. And the reason why is because there are so many problems to solve. If you define a problem as a gap between where you are or where you need to be, where you are and where you need to be or would like to be, that's how we define problems. There are many, many gaps. There are many, many problems in any organization, no matter how large or small. There are many processes to be improved. You might actually be performing pretty well. Maybe your customers are actually happy with your performance, but you can always get better, and you want to keep raising that bar. That's where continuous improvement comes in, and so you want to make sure that you're always improving those processes. And there are many new opportunities to explore, new products, new services, new markets, new geographic areas. There's many, many places for a business to explore to grow. So with all this stuff that you could do, there's just overwhelming the amount of stuff you can do. Well, there's a methodical way to look at what really matters, what matters now, and how do we prioritize. And that's where strategy deployment comes in. Because what happens is, and this is very common in organizations, everything becomes a priority, and the more unfocused your leadership team is, the more everyone all the way down to the front lines will feel that wave of the lack of focus. And so when I wrote The Outstanding Organization and had the 4 fundamental organizational behaviors, they are clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement. Focus is actually one of the ones that we find most organizations need quite a bit of help with. They suffer from organizational ADD, or attention deficit disorder. And clarity is also very fundamental and toughest to achieve. That's the foundation of my next book, which is going to be out next year, called Clarity First. But back to focus, you really have to be able to prioritize what you're going to do, and this applies to your personal lives as well. It applies to your families, it applies to your work team, it applies to your department, your division, and your company or your organization if you're a government agency, etc. So you have to prioritize. Here's what happens. In today's world, there's so much noise. There's so much coming at us that it's very easy to get distracted. It's easier in 2016 than it was in 2010. It was, easier in 2005 before 2010 came out. It's just getting more and more difficult to become focused. So it's a skill set that you can develop and should develop, and the better you develop that skill, the more successful you're going to be as a person and your organization will be on a whole. Distraction kills by texting while you're driving. Distraction kills companies, it kills work teams, it kills individuals, because you just can't possibly juggle it all. What happens when you have all these ideas coming in and you're not using a methodical way to sort through them and prioritize is that it creates a lot of stress, It creates a bouncing back and forth, kind of like a pinball machine, so ping, 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 and it just doesn't result in the kinds of results that you would want, high quality and effective and long-standing results. So you've got to focus on the relevant few. So this methodology will help you learn how to focus on the relevant few. Now, this is why this is so important. There was when I did my research for the Outstanding Organization, I came upon a guy, David Meyer, Professor David Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R, at University of Michigan, and he had done some very, very impressive work with studying engineers, and he found that there was no such thing as multitasking. Cognitive tasks, you can't do two cognitive tasks that use brain power at the same time. What you're actually doing, if you're trying to do that, is you're switch tasking. And so you're switching from one task to the other. What you can multitask is a cognitive and a non-cognitive activity. So you could be watching TV and eating, for example. You could be theoretically driving and drinking a Starbucks coffee, which I do on a regular basis. You could do that, but you can't do two things at once that require brain energy, cognitive brain energy. And if you want to test this, go home tonight and turn on the TV or do it at work and look at something that has a ticker tape running along the bottom, a TV station with that, either a sports channel or a stock, financial channel, or even the news now has most of the stations, and try to listen to the commentator or the anchor and really retain what he or she is saying and read what the ticker tape says and try to retain it. No can do. You won't be able to do it. It just goes to show that you can't do two cognitive tasks at the same time. So in order to help us break this habit, we have to focus on two behavioral shifts. One is we've got to learn how to stop doing non-essential work. That means you as an individual, it means your work teams, your department, your company. Companies have to stop doing all that they're doing in order to focus on the relevant few and get it done well and get it wrapped and then move on to the next thing, which leads us to focus law number 2. Do fewer things at once. Now, this goes against everything that feels right in the world that we live in because of all this noise around us. We think that we have to juggle. In fact, job descriptions often will say, must be good at multitasking. And the minute you see a job description that says that, you should discount it right away because it's not possible, first of all, and it's certainly not healthy. And we wouldn't want to be encouraging unhealthy people to come into our companies now, would we? So you need to stop doing and do fewer things at once. If you do fewer things at once, I guarantee you'll get a heck of a lot more done in the same period of time than if you don't do that. Here's an example. This is a client. Before they started applying this type of focus, they had 20 priorities that they tried to achieve in 1 year, and they got 3 of them done reasonably well. Not even really well, but reasonably well. A lot of stress, a lot of angst, a lot of chaos, but they got 3 done. After they applied fewer things at once rule, they stopped doing, so they focused down a little bit. They had only 12 on their list, about equal in complexity, and they completed all 12 through a very disciplined approach of managing the plan. Now, what would you rather have, the 3 or the 12? Obviously 12 is much better, so this is one data point. Another one is a company, and this happens to be in product development, a company was not focused and they were trying to do too many product projects at one time. They completed 24 in 1 year. After they started doing fewer at once, they completed 73 new products, same level of complexity, no additional resources, and the entire staff said that the stress level was significantly less, and it was a little bit anecdotal, but the quality of the product and the customer receptivity to the products were much, much higher. So again, this is powerful stuff to be able to just do fewer at once and get them done well and then move on, and you get more done in 1 year or 1 quarter or 1 month or 1 hour. So the key to Apple's success, I don't know what's going on right now with the new iPhone, but Steve Jobs had some pretty good leadership traits. He had some questionable ones as well, but he had some really good leadership traits, and one of them was he had an incredible laser focus on priorities. So he was able to keep saying no, 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 no to all the ideas that people were coming up with and to be able to focus on getting one done well. And arguably, the iPod, the iPad, the iPhone, all of these products are more or less some of the highest quality products we see in our marketplace. So, this focus stuff is pretty powerful. The other thing is that when we say stop doing or do fewer things at once, the other thing is not now, not yet. So it could be, it's very important, but it's just going to be, take a ticket. It's going to get in the line behind other priorities. So now it's time for you to get your smartphone, get it on stopwatch, or get a stopwatch, whatever you might have available, and piece of paper and pencil or pen. What we're going to do is a little experiment here. We're going to have, you have two tasks to perform. The first task is you're going to write the sentence, focus reduces chaos. That's one task. The second task, don't start yet. I see you. Don't start. The second task is writing the numbers 1 through 17, and that happens to correspond with the number of letters in focus reduces chaos. Now, we're going to do this timed twice. We're going to time ourselves when we do it with a switch tasking model and a non-switch tasking model. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to switch tasks, and you're going to start with writing the letter F and then the number 1, the letter O, number 2, 3, 3. We're going to switch, 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 switch back and forth until you get all 17 numbers written. Okay? So get your stopwatch ready. Here's a space here for your letter, your sentence, a space for your numbers. On your mark, get set, go. And I can sing the Jeopardy song if you'd like. Do, 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 do. I'll be curious to see what you think about doing a little activity during the webinar. Let me know with the evaluations. You should be almost done. People are pretty much consistent on this. And stop your stopwatch, obviously, when you're done. All right, write down your time. And notice how difficult it was. How much effort did you put into that task? All right, now let's clear your stopwatch. And let's do it one more time. This time we are not going to switch task. We're going to have task number 1 completed first, then follow it by task number 2. So first the sentence, write the full sentence, and then write 1 through 17 below it. On your mark, get set, go. Most of you are probably halfway done, and some of you are probably done. Take note of your time. All right, I'm going to assume you're done. Take note of your time. What was the difference? Most people, it's half. Most people, it's a half or a third, something like that. So, and I want you to also think about how much easier was it to do the no switch tasking. Oh, there's a question. It's a good one. Yeah, I'm getting quite a few like, wow, wow. So yeah, so you can either say task switching or switch tasking, either way. And it was a lot less stressful not switching tasks, right? So just think about a project, for example. Think about a project that you put on hold to go do something else because there's, some sort of distraction that comes in, and you have a whole project team, and then they have to come back and they have to kind of get their mind wrapped around it again. It's a significant drain on an organization. So you can apply this, anywhere you want. You can help your kids with it if you want to share it with your family members and things like that. It's really powerful. So what strategy deployment is the ability for us to, stop the switch tasking or at least minimize it. what it does is that you have a true north, a direction that your company is going in, your department, your division, your work team. There is a consensus around that direction. This is where we want to go, and this is how long we want to take to get there. And then it creates impeccable focus, laser focus on solving the problems that you need to solve or closing the gaps you need to close in order to get there. Now, a couple things that are commonly misunderstood about strategy deployment. The first thing is, it assumes you actually have a strategy. So you want to make sure that there is a clear strategy that leadership has consensus around, or, if you're a department, then that you guys have a consensus around. The second thing is that back in the 80s, a management practice started called cascading goals. And I was part of that. I was in my first corporate job in the 80s, and our leadership team went off site and they came up with some goals for the next fiscal year. They came back, they gave them to my boss, who was a director then, and said, hey, work with your team and figure out what you're going to do to help support these, and she did. And then I was a manager at that point, and I had a team, and so I went to my team and created the goals to support my director's goals, which supported the executive's goals, and life went on. So it was cascading goals. So strategy deployment does have indeed cascading goals, but it's done very, very differently from the old way. The feature that we use in strategy deployment done kind of properly is called catch ball. So think about two people tossing a ball back and forth, catch, back and forth. What happens is the executive team still does what they used to do. They go off site, they look, take a look at the landscape, look at the company's strengths and weaknesses, look at where they want to go, look at the marketplace, etc. And they decide what they think should be the focus for the next fiscal year. It's usually done on a fiscal year basis. And they come and they give, they toss that ball to senior management. But here's where it's different. Senior management doesn't just take the ball and run with it. They think about it. They look at the world from their lens. What do they see? And they may disagree with the executive's priorities and say, well, why aren't we working on this? This seems like a big deal. And I don't see that as being a big problem next year. It was this year, but for these reasons. And I think these should be the list of things that we're working on. And so the ball goes back and forth, tossing back and forth. They reach consensus, meaning that a commitment toward direction. Then it goes to the next level. Senior management tosses it to middle managers. Middle managers say, well, I don't know. I see this. I'm closer to the customer, and this is what I see, and so forth. At the middle management level, they could come up with a new idea that then gets tossed back up to the executive team for consideration and an adjustment with the priorities based on middle managers' greater line of sight to the customer, and it could change the priorities and should change the priorities if it's a legitimate legitimate reason and to do it. And then it can go all the way to the front lines in a very mature company. And again, the front lines can come up with an idea that then goes back to the executive team. So it's, it's a pretty powerful thing if you take it all the way to the front lines. And with large companies, this is a big deal to take it all the way to the front lines. So you can't do it all in 1 year. We recommend starting very small and just playing catch ball between the first 2 levels the first year, and then maybe 3 levels the first year, and then 4 levels, the third year, because it takes a while to get used to this type of collaborative, consensus-driven decisions. So that's a little bit about catch ball. There's more detail that I could share, but we need to move on. So we have a little, yes, it does take a lot of time, by the way. So there's a couple questions. So in the first year, it sometimes will take, a couple months, assuming you have a clear strategy and all you're doing is creating the deployment plan, then it can take a couple months to get the deployment plan created with homework and the different activities that we have the teams do, leadership teams do, and then the catch ball. I probably would allow in a big company for the first year 4 months to get the plan developed. Now, ideally, the plan is developed before the budget is created. It's often done in reverse, which is kind of silly, but so you have to start quite a bit before your fiscal year starts to get this done well. So we have a kind of unconventional way of going about this with companies, because remember that most of the clients that we get, and that any of you who are on the webinar who are consultants get, are clients who aren't already doing this, or they wouldn't have you come in and do it. And so you have to take a year or so to break habits. And so one thing we do is a landscape survey, first of all, everything that's going on, to find out how much noise there really is in the organization. So we have the senior leadership team, and this is senior leaders, so vice presidents and above. or directors in a small company. So no more than about 15 at the most, go out, go to their teams and gather a list of all the active projects or initiatives that are going on. And so this is something different from just the course of doing business. So special projects that require additional resources. Anything that started and was stopped for whatever reason, so stalled projects and initiatives. Anything that's planned, it's not on an active list, or maybe, I'm sorry, it is on an active list, but nothing has started on it yet. And then the desired projects are not on an active list. They're just things that as you start talking with people, they'll say, you know what we need to do? We need to do this. We need to fix this. And so those are the desired. And then the stealth or rogue projects and initiatives are those that no one even really knew existed, but yet they were robbing staff of their time and their attention. So in a company with about 1,200 employees that we recently worked with, guess how long the list was once we got rid of all the duplicates? 414. So they had 414 non-normal course of business kinds of projects and initiatives on their original list for us to work with. So what we do then is we get the leadership team together, and step one is, you list all these things down, which they did, and you get them on 3x6 Post-its. We actually didn't do all 414 on Post-its, but you get a reasonable number, 100 or 2 on Post-its, and then you hang flip chart paper or 36-inch white paper on a wall, and you start categorizing them into one of 4 categories. Must do, no debate, absolutely must do it. Well, we need to do it, but maybe not quite this year. We could delay it till next year. Eliminate, it was needed at one time, something has shifted now, no longer needed, and then you end up with a great big list of maybes. And you get consensus more or less on those 4 lists, especially the must-dos. And then you have to disposition the maybes, and so the maybes go into one of the other 3 lists, and you're left with an empty maybe. And then what you're doing is you're making your strategy deployment plan based on the must-do list. And the must-do list should be relatively small. Sometimes we have to do a second round of must-do and then disposition these and have some of them move into the delay category and just hold off for next fiscal year. So there was a leadership team we were working with where the executive VP of sales was just, insistent that they had to create this new web portal because they were losing market share and losing kind of reputation in the marketplace because their competitors had this really fancy kind of sexy web portal, and everybody else on the leadership team felt that the IT resources should be spent on fixing their what do you call it, their oh shoot, it was a delivery service, so it was the way they assigned the trucks to go out. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word. Well, you know what I mean. No, not ERP. Someone's mentioning that. No, they're the assignment software, and which truck's going where, and the logistics software. So the VP, the executive VP of sales, eventually lost his battle and gave it up. He didn't agree with the decision, but he committed to the decision. That's what consensus is. And so sometimes it can be a little rough and tumble within the leadership team getting to that final list of the relevant few that are must-dos, but that's just part of what has to happen in order to get people to agree on something. Now, what does the plan look like? Well, this is what I would dispatch. Thank you. Dispatching those trucks. That's what they wanted to spend their resources on, and that's what they did spend their resources on. So a lot of people, try to use this thing known as an X matrix. It's a consulting firm created it. I've never had a client successfully use it and not create more chaos and confusion than not. I'm a clarifying gal. I like clear, simple, everyone can understand it. This doesn't do it for me, and it doesn't do it for any client who has tried it. And I've had many organizations we've moved into that have been using X matrices that say, oh, thank goodness, when we make it something a little simpler. So what is that? We just use a simple Excel. We start with a blank sheet every time. This is not a template. Every organization has different needs on what it looks like, but it needs to have an entire year at a glance as far as the priorities on it. So, typically the priority column is framed in either a problem most of them should be framed as problems. This is a gap we need to close. This is a high priority. This is a fairly large company, by the way. And then there should be some sort of measurable objective. How will we tell if we're successful? And then you can have any number of, they just wanted to do their Gantt-ish chart this way with start and end, proposed start and end times. So you could at a glance see, is the work front-loaded to the beginning of the year, the end of the year, where is it? There's an executive owner. The way we like to have clients work, there's an executive owner so that there's always, C or VP level eyes on the project monitoring progress. And then there's someone a little bit lower in the organization typically that takes it on from a tactical perspective. And then this particular grid we don't always use, but this was one that they were a little worried about the IT area getting too heavily committed. And so we use this little 1, 2, and 3 based on the level of involvement any functional area would have. So it's IT, marketing, operations, HR, Bob was the CEO, finance, etc. And you can just at a glance then make sure that no one person is getting hit too much at any one time of the year. So that's a nice visual. So that's what our plan, that's kind of sort of what our plan looks like. It can vary quite a bit actually from company to company. And so after that plan is created, then there needs to be very strong plan management with, weekly or every other week and then eventually monthly, assuming that everything's moving along well. And these meetings are the original leadership team, the executive team. Sometimes they bring in the next level down. The focus is every line item, every priority is either red or green, no yellow. It's either on target or off target. And every team member, where it's red, the focus is on how to get it into green. And it's a very collaborative, how can we help you? And the leadership teams really bond through doing this. Most of the time there's been some sort of tension between at least 1 or 2 people on the leadership team, which is never good for an organization. And this process actually does a lot more than just create a plan. It actually helps bond those relationships so that you can get people working more effectively together. And the tone is supportive, but usually one person owns a plan. It's often the CEO or an executive VP or sometimes COO, depending on the organization, but it's usually, someone pretty high up, and there's no kind of sloughing off. The other thing is that the progress is posted physically. They're physical, not just in a computer. If there's something that's competitive intel or competitive, sensitive information, that can be removed from the plan. That only the executives see, but the plan should be very clear to the whole organization what's being worked on, and what the progress is. The other thing is that these plans are not meant to be in cement, but they're also not meant to be subjected to the whims of the day. So you do, these meetings often include discussions about whether priorities need to be switched, or if something brand new coming out of left field, coming in from the marketplace, needs to kind of displace something that's already on the plan. But it needs to be rare that you do that. And the habit we're trying to build is focus, not continuing distraction and organizational ADD. So the plan management meetings are very, very key. Now, problem solving is very closely tied to strategy deployment. And so I'm going to just say a few things here that are sometimes a little controversial, but most people believe that you should start, if you're going to take the lean journey, for example, and use lean management, you should start with strategy deployment. But organizations that aren't very mature with problem solving tend to stumble quite a bit if they start with strategy deployment, because they just don't even know how to problem solve. And so we like to wait a couple years until an organization is showing some good signs of kind of robust problem solving and managing KPIs well, and before we suggest that they start on strategy deployment. And it's certainly debatable, and I wish we could always start with it. I just don't find that all organizations are ready for it. We even have had a couple of very seasoned lean organizations share that they didn't start strategy deployment until year 5 of their lean journey. So there's something to this maturity model idea. But the one thing about it is we do want to call problems problems so that they carry a sense of urgency. An opportunity for improvement, You know, an opportunity you can walk away from. It's an opportunity. You can take it or leave it. A problem is a problem, and it's urgent, and you need to solve it. So if you want to create organizational, a momentum around solving closing a gap, call it what it is. It's a problem. It's a gap to be closed. And the other thing is critical. Culturally, the organization needs to kind of embrace problems versus hiding from them and not talking about them. I mean, problems should be a very common conversation point in meetings and hallways, and because while they are annoying to deal with and they're irritating, they produce pearls at the end. And so, quite a few of the leaders at Toyota that have now left Toyota, you'll hear them say all the time, which they got from their chairman, no problem, that's a problem. So there's always problems, there's always gaps to be closed. Now, there are many, many scientific problem-solving methodologies or disciplined problem-solving methodologies. Plan, do, study, adjust is only one. There's DMAIC, DMAIC, there's 8D, there's TBP, Toyota Business Practice, which is a 8-step model, very similar to 8D, and and so on. So most of them have their foundation though in Pdsa or Pdca, Plan, do, check, act. If you want to know why I prefer Plan, do, study, adjust, there's a pretty well-researched sidebar in the Outstanding Organization you can take a look at. But anyway, what Pdsa ultimately is creating some sort of a hypothesis after you're very, very clear about the problem, how big it is, what the root cause or causes are, and you're basically coming up with a hypothesis that you believe that this countermeasure or this solution is going to solve the problem at the end of all that clarity. And then you conduct an experiment to see if you're right. This is just classic science, hypothesis experiment. And then you study your results from your experiment, and it either worked or it didn't work, and then you either reject it altogether and start all over again, you refine the countermeasure based on what you learned, or you can standardize it, stabilize it, and implement it exactly as the experiment was run. So there are lots of different options based on the experiment. The other thing you'll notice here is this is kind of these concentric circles here. It's a nested Pdsa cycle based on big problems to be solved all the way down to little problems that are part of the big problems. So if you're familiar with fractals, F-R-A-C-T-A-L-S, fractals, Pdsa is a fractal type of thinking pattern and solution orientation, so that you're going from macro problems to micro problems, and you'll see why this is important at the very end of this webinar. So another way to think about this is that you aren't done when you complete one circle of Pdsa. You should never be done, and so improving needs to become part of the work, not something separate, not a separate Kaizen event, not a separate value stream mapping analysis that leads to projects and Kaizen events, not something where you pull people off and put them in a room once a week for 3 months. It needs to be part of solving, part of doing the work itself. And so the cycle should start the minute it's done, and continuous. That's what continuous improvement is. Most of the time we have a very kind of commonly discontinuous improvement methodology going on out there, not continuous, discontinuous. So that's what this is all about, is building those muscles. So now the other thing to think about is that, so I took the 4 steps and people were missing really key parts of the process, and so I created the 12-step program for problem solving. And plan is the most important step, and it should be a disproportionate part of the overall time frame for solving problems. It should be 50 to 80% of the total time, but it's not linear. It looks very linear here. It actually in real world is not linear at all, because what happens is you can get down to all the way down to testing your countermeasures, and then you go, oh my goodness, look at this. And then you go, well, that didn't work, and you go back up and you identify a new countermeasure. You can get all the way down to measuring process performance and say, whoops, we were wrong on our root cause, and have to go back up and start down again. So there's a lot of learning, and then when you're done, you may want to raise the bar and go up to a new target condition. Or you may discover a new problem, a new urgent problem that needs to be solved by starting all over again, because you've changed the set point. You've changed the, kind of the foundation, and so new problems may emerge. So this is a much more detailed way of looking at the 12 steps, or the 4 big buckets of plan, do, study, adjust, so that you don't miss a step. And here's another one, like for example, testing countermeasures. So many improvement teams I hear just kind of first of all leap to a solution, and then they don't even test it, they just implement, and it creates more organizational chaos and more problems than what it really, I mean, the net gain was not net, it was negative, so it wasn't positive. So that's the kind of thing you want to be wary of. And I'm going to get in a minute back to strategy deployment and why this matters so much with strategy deployment. As I mentioned, nailing the P stage is the most important cycle or element in the cycle, and what we find is when you get very, very clear about the problem, and you've done a very good job on steps 1 through 4, 5 becomes super easy. You don't have to debate countermeasures much of the time once you get to step 5. So if you find that your teams are debating, what should we do about this? I guarantee they're not clear enough about the problem and you need to go back. And when leaders are like, solve it now, get it done in 1 week, you know what? Some problems can't be solved in a week. And they didn't happen in a week, and they can't be solved in a week. And if you want to become really responsible problem solvers, you have to push back on that. You don't want to get analysis paralysis. You want to move at a really good clip, but you also don't want to skip steps and have a faulty result or a non-sustainable result because you were rushing and kind of forced through the process and skip steps. So it's, again, culture and leadership, big part of this. What you're getting to in the plan stage is the truth. And there are many, many ways to get to the truth. But it's basically like, you're an investigator and you're, investigating. It's like watching a movie or TV when they're investigating a murder. They don't know where it's going to turn. Look at the JonBenet Ramsey case. For those of you who are in the U.S. and know about that little girl that was murdered so many years ago, they're just now starting to come up with new evidence that there absolutely was an intruder. And, so there's just, all these years later, they're finding the root cause of this little girl's murder, or they think they're onto it at least. So it takes time. But again, no analysis paralysis, just follow the steps. The steps will not lead you astray. Follow the steps. The current state analysis and getting very clear takes all kinds of forms. I mean, it might be going and seeing and studying the real world. It may be data-based, looking at data. You may need to draw spaghetti diagrams, which is an aerial view of an oil rig. And this is during the rig up process when they're making the rig vertical and before they break ground and start drilling. This is just all the movement of the different people and that type of thing, and getting clear about what was going on there. Was the problem they were trying to solve was going faster and yet more safely. And then here's a value stream map. You may need to do value stream mapping to understand all the interconnections across a big swath of the organization. There's all kinds of things that you might do. So you just have to honor the problem and choose wisely. The other thing that happens is, remember how we had all those arrows before? When you have just the plan stage you're looking at, the same kind of thing can happen. You can get new information any step along the way that causes you to have to go back up and redefine the problem, or do some additional current state work, or there's just a number of things that happen because sometimes the problem starts kind of vague and it's a little ambiguous, and by getting more and more clear about the data and everything, then you're getting more clear about what the problem actually is. Other thing I want to mention is target condition is a big debate on where it belongs in the sequence. I am becoming more and more of a fan of setting the target condition up front, and that's different from how some people think. To me, knowing what you should be doing and what you want to be doing, what level you want to be at, and setting that up front gives you a clearer direction on what you need to find in terms of the current condition, and learn about the current condition and which direction to go in terms of root cause work. So I'm getting more and more a fan of setting target condition first, but there is not any kind of prescribed sequence that you have to follow. You just have to follow all these steps and let it iterate iterate when it needs to. So, for example, when you're defining and breaking down the problem, people often think that the problem is, kind of this big, hairy animal, and it is at a high level, but then once you get really clear on it, it's sometimes, like in this example, it seemed like it was a data integrity problem, and, then you go and you start talking about it, and you learn more, and the no control, we have no control over our refrigerant inventory. Well, is that true in all locations? Is that true in only some of them? And you have to get, very well versed on what is going on with that situation. And then the other thing is, when we're working with problem teams, which we're actually doing quite a bit of right now, preparing for, we talk about, well, why is this a problem? So what? Number 2 is a really big question. So what? So what if that happens? And oftentimes teams can't answer that right away, and so they have to go and learn, well, what's the impact of this problem? And then, how do you know it's a problem? Who says so? What proof is there? How big is it? Is it happening, every time? Is it 100% frequency? Is it 10% frequency? And then figure out which aspect of the problem you're going to address, because you can't solve big, complex problems all at once and quickly. You have to pick pieces by pieces and take them one at a time. With grasping the current condition, you'll see this, highly visual piece here, which makes it very easy to talk with people and gain consensus. This is the section of an A3 report, which I'm about to share with you, the full well, not this one, but a full A3 report. And so this helps you, be able to talk with people and have them kind of come along with you on the journey of solving this problem versus fighting you because they don't understand the facts. This helps you convey facts more clearly, more easily, and then you can get everyone kind of on your side as a problem solver. And again, leadership should be able to do these very, very well also, all the way from the top to the front lines ultimately, and everyone needs to be able to have the same conversations around problems. So setting a target condition, I mentioned that it should come up front. One thing I will mention is that, there's a level of urgency and looking at available resources and all of those things that matter on how aggressive you get. So, we were working with a team last night that said that they wanted to go from, there's a metric, overall equipment effectiveness, that's common in manufacturing and in kind of equipment-based office and service environments. And they were at 54% and they wanted to get to 80%. And one round of problem solving, I was like, wow, that's pretty aggressive. Do you think you can do that? And they're like, wow. And they just weren't seasoned problem solvers to know that you don't set that aggressive of a target. 54 to 60, absolutely. 54 to 70, maybe. 54 to 80 in one cycle of improvement, probably not going to happen. So choose wisely. And then root cause and gap analysis. If you and your teams get really well versed on these 4 tools, you will be able to solve 99% of your problems with these 4 tools. And you can learn all of the other tools, all the complex tools, but most problems don't require that level of complexity, and you can do some just really good work by getting very well versed in 5 whys, cause and effect, or fishbone diagrams, as they're sometimes called, or Ishikawa diagrams as well, problem analysis trees or problem breakdown trees, and Pareto charts. They can help you a long way. So then and only then, after you have that level of clarity, do you identify potential countermeasures, and those are the solutions, quote unquote. I don't like that word, but it's the solution that it sounds very final, like it's never going to be adjusted again, and that's not very realistic. But these are the things that are going to address the problem, at least you think. This is your hypothesis, and you can implement those and see. Do a test and see. Do a pilot. And then you do your experiment, and then you study it, and then you measure performance, and you refine, standardize, stabilize, or modify and go back to the beginning again. And that is basically Pdsa in a nutshell. So this is a full A3 report after one full cycle of Pdsa. This is just the initial cycle of Pdsa. And for those of you who have never heard of A3 reports, it's an 11 by 17-ish piece of paper. It's in exact centimeters in Europe, Asia, etc. I forget exactly how many centimeters it is, but it is basically R11 by 17 in the US. And it's a visual distillation or a synthesis of all the thinking, all the work, all the data, all the everything on one sheet of paper that allows you to tell a compelling story about the problem-solving process, to gain consensus from others, to help clarify for people, to communicate status, and to help everyone learn about problem solving. The primary reason why it was developed was for coaching problem solving, so it was a communication tool between a learner and a coach, and the coach was using the A3 report to have conversations and to coach the problem owner or the learner how they're thinking and breaking habits as a result of seeing the visual distillation or synthesis of all the work that's going on. What you shouldn't ever be doing is an A3 report to hang it on a wall, or an A3 report at the end of the problem-solving cycle. That kind of defeats the whole point. So make sure if you're going to use them that they're being used well and they're being used purposefully and that they're doing what they were meant to do. Now, how does this all apply to or tie back to strategy deployment? Well, strategy deployment does start with senior leadership deciding, how do we keep growing the business? Where do we want to go? Which markets do we want to be in? Where do we want to play? Geographically, what areas do we want to be in? Do we want to vertically integrate? Do we want to outsource? Do we want to insource? Where do we want to go? So big business questions. And then middle managers get in the ranks of kind of these problems. So these are the focus areas for the year. And then they get into problem solving at one step down, which for example could be, let's say that there's a customer dissatisfaction issue around timeliness, or it could be that you're losing market share to someone who's able to produce product more quickly. Product, I mean service or good, more quickly. So middle management might want to solve the problem of reducing lead time, for example. And that could be a pretty pesky problem to solve. I mean, reducing lead time can sometimes be very difficult and complex. So middle management gets there. And then as far as aligning all the way up to the senior leadership focus areas of growing the business, for example, and also tied to reducing lead time, the front lines might get very involved with how to reduce setup time at a particular workstation to reduce the lead time to then be able to grow the business and gain market share. So these all tie in. What shouldn't happen in an organization is what we see. Sometimes the front lines only work on problems or improvements that directly tie to the senior-most leadership focus areas, and they don't do anything else. And then I see all this time being spent trying to jury-rig and fit this improvement that they're doing. How does that fit with this goal? And there's all this time and energy spent trying to make things fit, when in reality there's a ton of little minor problems to be solved that the front lines can definitely work on, in addition to the ones that feed into the focus areas. So it shouldn't be an exclusive improvement focus for front lines, but it needs to be at least included so that it can focus all the way up to the senior-most goals for the organization. Now, the other thing is that I mentioned having a wall or having it visually available. We're big believers in true north walls or strategy deployment walls or something, performance walls, you can call it what you want, where most of the time the overarching improvements to be made are in buckets. Now, it smacks a little bit of balanced scorecard, and you can call it that if you'd like, but it's basically looking at the organization's performance through multiple lenses and deciding which of the categories of performance need to be improved this fiscal year. Oftentimes these stay stable for quite a few years, but then they can be swapped out with something new. Sometimes they stay stable forever, and they're the permanent 4 categories, but not always. And then it could be that you have, maybe one area that you're going to work on that will help customer experience, and maybe 2 areas that will help the people part, people engagement, and that type of thing. I mean, every organization is different. This is where you absolutely cannot copy and just take what someone else has done and apply it in your organization, because everything's different in your organization. But this is a basic layout of a wall, and the measures are the KPIs that support and will allow you to measure success in achieving whatever that focus problem to be solved or focus improvement to be made is. Here's another one with just 4 different categories, and this one was growth, customer experience, people, and expense management or cost reduction. This one is quality, delivery improvement, so speed, also cost, and human development, so also people. So they can have different categories depending on what's important. Then the other thing is that each one of the, so let's take a look here, each one of these focus A3, so here there are 6 of them, each one of them can have a problem A3 that's part of the focus A3. So it depends on, the relationship between how macro the problem is and how micro it needs to be ultimately to solve it. But you can have a wall of the A3s that show progress every step along the way for the problems or the projects, initiatives, whatever you want to call them, that are being done to support the senior-most goals that were set, and with catch-ball set. So this is a quick overview, and if you look at our webinar site, and you can go again on YouTube, Vimeo, or SlideShare, there are many webinars on strategy deployment and on problem solving that are focused. I have one that's just the P of plan, do, study, adjust, a whole webinar. So you can look at those. And then in terms of the 2 books that we recommend the most for strategy deployment, Pascal Dennis's Getting the Right Things Done is really good. The one thing is you have to, like novels, business novels, because it is a fictionalized story, but it's very, very well written, very easy to understand. Highly recommend it. And then Tom Jackson's Hosh and Connery for the Lean Enterprise is another one that's kind of more of a workbook feel to it. And I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe he uses the X matrix, which again I recommend you do not. Try it, see for yourself. And then in the Outstanding Organization, which I wrote, I cover both of the areas. And then for A3 specifically, Managing to Learn, John Shook's book, and Understanding A3 Thinking are 2 of the better books out there on A3. And then there's always workshops, conferences, tours, and of course practice. You've got to practice. You'll get better and better and better with practice. So at this stage of the game, I see quite a few questions have come in. I'm really glad to see all these questions. So I'm going to spend a little more time. I'm glad we have a little extra time here so we can get to them. We'll go to them in a minute. I just want to also share, in case any of you are going to get off, that we have a newsletter. I've been pretty remiss this year in sending out stuff because I've just been so busy with client work and traveling the globe. So I'm going to try to get better next year. But if you want to subscribe so you get updates on those rare occasions when I send one out, that also gives you access to our free templates and assessments library that we've got. Feel free to check out any of the social media sites and join us on LinkedIn and Twitter and all that good stuff. And then there's some books that I've written. So. All right, so let's go to your questions. Oh, and don't forget the next webinar, October 27th. It's a Thursday. Okay, so let me go down to, I'm going to actually go to the bottom and go back up. Which tools would you recommend for the smaller team problems? I don't understand the question. Which tools would you recommend for the smaller team problems? So Claude, if you could just maybe give me a little more information on what you're asking specifically on that one, I would love to help you. I don't understand the question, sorry. Question about slides being available. They'll be up. We always commit to 24 hours, so I just don't know what the queue is today for getting those up. So the slides will be on SlideShare within 24 hours, and the videos will be loaded within 24 hours as well. Okay, next question. Could you give us more pre-work ideas or tips for the Focus A3 work? The pre-work is really just them doing that scan of the landscape and coming in with all the stuff that's going on that's not the course of normal business, the lists of projects and initiatives in queue currently being worked on, you know, new ones that come up as they're thinking about it and all that. That's pretty much the work. We also always ask for KPIs. What are their key performance indicators? What is their strategy? We try to get a copy of the strategy, the actual strategy. Strategic plans are very often not strategic and not plans. So it's a great way for us to tell where the organization is. We also ask for, you know, business performance, current state business performance against annual business goals, so we can see where they're at. That's about it. Sometimes they already know that they've got a big problem to solve, and we will ask for a data dump, and we'll do data analysis to help reflect back what we see the need is, but not always, and actually not often. So. Okay, next question is, thank you, Richard. So yes, to the person's question about the slides being available, I forgot to mention they are already available on your control panel in PDF form. So if you just look at your control panel, there's a little area for materials, and you can just click that link, and it's an Adobe file. Okay, next question. How can we integrate Hosh and Conry with Balanced Scorecard? Very easily. They actually work really well together. I'm not kind of militant about which categories you use for your balanced scorecard. I'm only militant that you have to have balance. So, you know, a lot of organizations, when we first start working with them, almost everything's a financial goal. And, you know, we'll help them understand there's a lot more to it than just financial performance. And so balance is what's important, and it can work very well together. So definitely don't throw out your balanced scorecard just because you want to change to a new method. Let's see. I've seen it shorten the execution time tremendously and minimize politics. I don't know what that means. Okay, I'm looking at the questions that are coming in. Let's see. I'm going to skip down here. Someone else is saying that they've seen a lot of confusion on the X matrix as well. And then there's another question. How do you visualize correlation between 3- and 5-year breakthrough in this year's plans? All right, great question. So let's talk about this. I like being able to look 5 years ahead, but I don't really do much personally with our business. I don't do much with it because things change so fast in the business world and in society now that it's really tough to see 5 years ahead. Now, that doesn't mean you don't think about it and plan for it, but I don't actually put measurables out there for 5 years, and I don't really think any business who has done that has ever had the same goal once they got 3 or 2 years, you know, from that 5th year. It always changes, so it's kind of a moot point. I think just general idea of where you want to be is important, but measurement, I only do annual and maybe 2-year measurements, and that's it. I know that a lot of people are big believers in the 3- to 5-year breakthroughs. I'm just not. I am a practical gal, and I want to, you know, conserve energy for getting things done and not thinking about something that's going to change. So that's just my view. Okay, which problem did you experience with the Toyota business practice 8-step solving, so now a new 12-step process was created? Ooh, I'd have to go back and look at my comparison. I had a spreadsheet of comparisons. I can tell you that I don't think testing is explicitly on the Toyota 8 steps, and good question. I would have to go back and take a look at that. There were a number of things that I was finding teams. I actually didn't have many teams using TBP. They were using 8D, and so they were missing steps. I do know that. I'd have to do a comparison. Sorry. Okay. Possible improvement to one of the first slides. Can you add Jidoka, stop production when problem, as an important lean culture habit on the first slide? Yeah, I think it's there as error proofing, which is Jidoka basically. But I'll take a look at that. That's a good suggestion. Thank you. Okay, could you give us? Okay, wait, hang on. Okay, here's a follow-up question. For the team that have small problems, I feel the 8-step problem is too detailed. What other tools can you suggest? 3 C's, etc., question mark. Okay, so it depends on how micro the problem is. So here's, this is something that I see a lot. People learn Pdsa, whether it's just the 4 steps, whether it's 8 steps, whether it's 12 steps, whatever it is, and they try to apply it to everything, and that's just wrong. Because if you have an ergonomic problem, for example, and you need to move something so people don't stretch from one area to another area, you don't even need to do anything. It's a problem, but just move it. It's done. It's common sense. You don't have to analyze it. If you have calls that are on hold too long, for example, your hold times are going up, and you know that the primary reason is because you rolled out a new customer communication thing and you left out something really important, and then they go to use new software, we'll say, and now they can't use it because it was left out. You don't have to do root cause analysis about that. You do have to find out how you never leave something out like that again, and figure out what the approval process was for getting that out and make sure it doesn't happen again. But you don't need to do a fishbone diagram about all the possible reasons why someone forgot to put an important piece of information on a customer communication piece. Root cause analysis is needed, and plan, do, study, adjust is needed when it's a little more complex of a problem, and you want to make sure you don't pass any of the steps and skip any of the steps. And it's hard to describe, like, what kind of a problem do you need it for and don't need it for, but think about, if you're thinking about just plan, do, study, adjust, that's one question. The other question is, when do you need an A3 report and when don't you? And you can be doing tons of Pdsa work and not ever use an A3 report because it's rework and overkill, and it's just not needed in order to get a cycle of Pdsa complete. So, maybe one way to keep this specific would be to, to tell me what an actual problem is, like what something you're experiencing. What is it? And I can better say, yes, I'd use it, or no, I wouldn't use it for that. So that might be a good way to go. Are all 4 tools required to be used for step 4? No. Step 4 is root cause analysis. No. You pick and choose based on what you need. As a general practice, we always start with 5 whys. Most of the problems we get involved with are way more complex than what 5 whys can handle. But, in terms of frontline solving problems on a regular basis, 5 whys can get them pretty far. Now, fishbone diagram is we probably use that a good 80% of the time. And then problem breakdown trees, I'd say probably 50% of the time. Pareto, only complex problems get Pareto because there's multiple reasons for the problem and multiple potential solutions, and I'd say maybe 30% of the time we Pareto, maybe a little more than that. So no, you have to know the tool really well and what its use is in application is to know which one to pick. So next question. Our organization has a PMO that wants to own reporting out on projects and improvement initiatives. This often adds layers of bureaucracy, you got that right, without adding value at the source. Have you seen this in other organizations, and what were your recommendations? Okay. Well, I'm probably going to irritate half the people on the phone right now or listening to the webinar. I am so not a PMO fan. I think most PMOs are non-value adding. If you have good project management chops, and if you have a strong prioritization methodology and good focus and you just simply don't need a PMO. PMOs are a band-aid for organizations that are chaos filled, but I think PMOs add to the chaos. I'm not going to say anything more than that. I just don't see the value in most PMOs, and I'm sorry for those of you on the webinar that are in a PMO or believe in PMOs, or I just don't get it. Okay, moving on. 4 tools. Yeah, so I've already answered the 4 tools. You pick and choose what you need. Okay, which approach would you recommend for a company to establish KPIs? Hoshin approach? Okay, so Hoshin is not the same as KPIs, but you need KPIs in order to create a good strategy deployment plan. So you can have KPIs and manage your company with KPIs, you know, without ever starting strategy deployment. What you're missing is the focus that strategy deployment brings, and you know, the consensus around priorities and all that stuff. So you don't use Hoshin to establish them, but if a company doesn't have any KPIs, which is pretty rare, but if they didn't have any KPIs and they wanted to create this new management method, you know, using strategy deployment to get focus and build consensus and all that, then of course establishing KPIs would be part of that cycle. But you don't use Hoshin just to establish KPIs. Oh, I'm sorry. What is a PMO? I'm so sorry. Project Management Office. So you see these a lot in technology companies where there's a lot of IT. You do see them in other companies that are not IT. Financial services has PMOs a lot of the time. You know, it's a group of people that manage projects. And, you know, it's like that in the purest sense of value adding and non-value adding, it is absolutely non-value adding in the eyes of an external customer. Does a company need it? Well, if they need it, then I would get to root cause on why they need it and fix the root cause and then disband it eventually, because you know there's no point in having people that all they're doing is managing projects, professionally managing projects, it is my opinion. So okay, first slide, opening slide is a set of arrows, one big yellow arrow and a variety of smaller ones. What message is this intended to convey? Oh my gosh, that is a great question. All right, let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning and let's take a look at that slide. So hang on, and I'll tell you the genesis of that. Okay, so the yellow slide is the leader. And the yellow arrow, I'm sorry, the yellow arrow is the leader and the white arrow are all the people that are following the leader. And one of the reasons why I like this image is that we do find that when you try to implement lean in an organization or any kind of continuous improvement methodology, oftentimes the senior-most leaders feel that it can be delegated, and so they don't really get engaged in the process at all. And a leader, you can't delegate improvement 100%. You can delegate the process level, tactical level improvement, and you can delegate, you know, some of the mid-range work, but ultimately it still needs to be strategically thought through in order to have proper resource, you know, use, and also to make sure that you're limiting any kind of organizational ADD, attention deficit disorder. So that yellow arrow is absolutely vital in leading the organization toward true north and keeping the organization from deviating from its journey toward true north. So that's what that means. Thank you for asking that. That was an interesting question. Okay, next question, when working with an immature organization that may not be ready for strategy deployment, how would you invest your time to build robust problem-solving skills? What proportion of time would you invest in training, coaching, reflection? Good question. All right, so another thing that will probably rock the boat here, I just am becoming increasingly sour on any kind of classroom work. Classroom training, like training. You know, this work is very cognitive. It's actually emotional. There's a lot of learning how to be a good problem solver requires you to challenge some of your emotional foundations. You know, having respect and curiosity and humility is an emotional, psychological level. It's not just, you know, a technical level. And so I don't think that people learn how to solve problems unless they're solving problems. So we always go in and suggest if an organization wants to learn how to solve problems that we, you know, handpick some real problems, handpick the people that are relevant for at least the core group in solving that problem, and we start coaching them through problem solving. And there's no classroom work, there's nothing up front. We just teach as we're going. And usually we can do 2 to 4 problems at a time, as long as those problems don't have people resources needed for all 4 of them or 3 of the 4. The organization just has to choose the problems wisely so that you're not, you know, kind of stepping over each other. And the coaching part of it depends on where they are in the problem-solving process. So sometimes the coaching is daily. I've even had hourly coaching in a couple of weird things where it was a really tricky problem and the person was very, very green and they just needed a lot of help. And coaching, includes teaching too. So if they don't know what a fishbone diagram is, you have to, teach them what a fishbone diagram is and show them how to use it. Then there are also problems where they'll be rocking and rolling, and then I'll say, hey, call me when you need me. And then we'll have a touch base session, and I'll look at where they're at, usually with an A3 report, take a look and talk through where they're at, and they'll say, we're really stuck. We just don't know where to go next. And we'll talk through it, and they may need, a session every day because they're kind of stuck and they just need to get through that and have someone challenge their thinking and point them in the right direction and get them, moving again. So it really just does depend on where they're at. Usually more front-loaded coaching through the P stage than during execution, although we keep close ties with the problem owner throughout the whole cycle. I don't know if this is specific enough to help you, but reflection, so reflection, we are present during the reflection at the end typically, but we often, coach them to have reflection throughout so that they can just keep integrating that learning. And reflection needs to be not just the problem team that's working on it. It needs to be, sharing that their learning with the rest of the organization. So I hope that helps. I didn't answer in terms of proportion because it just varies so much. All right, so I think we're at it, 12:15 Pacific time. So thank you those of you who are, it's very late at night and very early in the morning, for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you again on another webinar. Please feel free to subscribe, ksmartin.com/subscribe. And next webinar is October 27th, the Thursday. And thank you very much for your time. I hope that this was helpful. Please be very candid with your comments as you complete the survey, a very brief survey as you log off or you get a follow-up email. Thanks so much. Have a great day or evening. Bye-bye.